She's a former FBI agent executive. She's also a lawyer, a Cook County prosecutor, a journalist. She is a corporate security training director, author of the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. She's here to talk about her experience investigating mass shooting events. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Today radio show. I'm your host. My name's John J. Wiley. In addition to being a radio broadcaster, I'm a retired police sergeant. For the latest news articles and much more, check out our website, letradioshow.com. In the Law Enforcement Today show, we'll be joined by special guests. We'll be talking about their experiences and issues affecting law enforcement officers, first responders, their families, their community, and victims of horrendous crimes. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Our page is Law Enforcement Today Radio Show. Check out the daily articles on our website, letradioshow.com. And while you're there, download our free app. Has this ever happened to you? You sign up for a free email newsletter, and within hours, you're receiving tons of spam. That won't happen when you subscribe for the free Law Enforcement Today Radio Show email newsletter. We won't spam you. No more than 2 emails a week. I promise. All subscribers are automatically entered in all future contests. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Scroll down to the sign-up area. That's letradioshow.com. Calling us from Washington, D.C. area, we have Catherine Schweit on the phone. Catherine is a person with a huge resume. Former FBI special agent executive, Cook County prosecutor. That means she's a lawyer, and I'll be happy to talk to her, unlike many lawyers. Journalist and corporate security training director. Also, there's more. Author of the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. Catherine, thanks so much for being a guest of the show. Very much appreciated.
Well, thanks. So kind of you to talk to me, even though I'm a lawyer.
Yeah, I know. Look, I'm an old city cop. You know how it goes with lawyers and old city cops. Sometimes it's a love-hate relationship, right?
I get it. But I served the cops well as a prosecutor, so I like cops.
I do, too. The prosecutors that I worked with and went to trial with were phenomenal in Baltimore. The hardworking folks never got enough attention, never got enough appreciation for all they did. And that also goes for the public defenders. They never got appreciation for what they did, and they always got dumped on. Anytime something went bad, it was always their fault.
Yeah, thankless job. But bless them for doing it. It's a thankless job.
You know, the truth is, Catherine, I tell people, I pride myself on being a good cop. I did a good job investigations. I did a really good job report writing and testifying in court. And you know how it taught me to be really good at testifying was the public defenders in district court. They were really top-notch lawyers.
They're there every day. The prosecutors are in court every day, too, but those public defenders are in court trying to do their best to represent people who just have no place else to turn, and they do it every day. They're fantastic. I agree with you. It doesn't surprise me to hear you say that.
You know, Hollywood has really done a horrible job portraying law enforcement officers in their films, TV, social media as well, and news. But the only other people that get the same sort of negative publicity all the time are prosecutors and public defenders. And it's almost like a laughable stereotype.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They're stereotyped buttonholed into some positions, not unlike the bad relationship between the FBI and law enforcement, which we all know if you work on the ground, you don't have time for bad relationships.
No, we don't. And we used to kid each other a lot, and we made fun of the FBI. They made fun of us. We made fun of the state police. They made fun of us. Same with the county. But the truth was, and you know this, Catherine, when push came to shove and things got dirty, we always took care of each other. We always had each other's back, and we always demanded, unlike what a lot of people think, we always demanded people do the job the right way.
That's right, because you can't afford to make mistakes, right? I mean, that's what we know from working on the ground.
I remember being a rookie cop, and the one thing that was taught to me early on was you don't want to be the cop. You don't want to be the bad guy that ruins a case, especially someone who killed someone or murdered a police officer. You don't want to be the one that did something stupid and emotional and got the case thrown out. So don't ever be that guy.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when I worked in Chicago, as a prosecutor, great officers who came in, and I actually teach DePaul university, I teach the I teach the police officers in a master's program there, teach them evidence, and that's one of the things that we talk about in class is, make sure that you control those people around you too. Control your temper, control everybody else's temper, because, you mess a case up, and nobody wants to have that happen.
No, you certainly don't want to be the one ethically that does something wrong. You don't want to be the one that does something stupid. We all made mistakes. Sometimes our emotions got beyond us, and that's, I believe, the squad concept really helps rein you in when you have that going on, because everybody has a bad moment. Everybody has a bad day. And as long as you make mistakes doing your job, that's one thing. Without beating this issue into the ground, this whole blue line wall of silence thing, I've never experienced it. I don't know if anybody else has, and I'm not sure when it faded from the American lexicon, but it's been gone for a very, very long time. One of the interesting things about your career, Catherine, you mentioned it. You teach police officers. You're a lawyer. You're a former FBI agent. And by the way, an author as well, and an investigative security consultant. Where do you find time to get all this done?
Well, I think it just kind of means I can't keep a job, Jay. That's what I'm thinking. So I do work. I thought when I retired from the FBI in 2017, I'd have more time to do the other things I wanted to do, but I spend a lot of time at my office at home. So I dig it out. I think because I'm a mission-oriented person. I'm kind of a do-gooder, and I just want to help where I can.
Very briefly, tell us about your law enforcement career in the FBI.
Well, I was born in Detroit, hurrah, and worked in Chicago as a prosecutor, as you mentioned. And then while I was there, went to law school, and then had a cousin who was an FBI agent, kind of talked me into applying. And so I joined the FBI, was assigned to our Milwaukee office, which is one of our smaller divisions. It covers the state of Wisconsin. Really did my groundwork there, like what it's like to be a rookie. I was working national security matters, international terrorism, and bank robberies, white supremacist cases, a lot of white supremacist cases. And then I got asked by the boss, which means I was told, to supervise the terrorism desk. And that happened to coincide a week before 9/11. I was the acting supervisor handling terrorism and pretty much started drinking by fire hose as we dealt with the reactions from 9/11. I went from there to one of our satellite offices, a resident agency where you handle everything from anybody who walks in off the street to big terrorist incidents and international incidents in coordination with other federal partners and local officers. Sometimes, primarily, you're the only federal agent there, so you got to rely on great relationships with the state and local police officers and tribal officers. Then I went out to Washington to work counterintelligence, national security matters in Washington, and in both FBI headquarters and in our field office there in Washington, D.C., which is where I really became exposed to what I do now, which is mostly mass shooting activities, but both in headquarters and the field office. And as I moved through my supervisor positions and different, authoritative positions that we have lots of names for that don't mean anything to the general public, I became managed more and more people through just as I rose up in the ranks, and I ended up in the last 5 years as an executive in charge of the FBI. So created the FBI's national security program that's with regard to active shooters, these mass shootings, and looking for ways to solve that and to help support state and local officers who really are at the front of the door when the shooters come in. So
you really worked your way from the ground level up.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a little bit the way that the FBI works. Everybody starts out as an agent, because an agent, it's kind of like they say about the Marines, an agent is an agent is an agent. Everybody's got to be able to do everything.
One of the reasons why I love talking to you, Catherine, is I love shattering stereotypes, especially stereotypes about law enforcement that the news media, Hollywood puts out there. And there are so many. I'm, by the way, an Irish Catholic. Some would say a Neanderthal, Cretan, knuckle-dragging epitome of what a street cop looks like and acts like. By the way, I always say, when I'm 85 living in an old folks' home, people go, shh, there's 5-0 when I'm walking with my walker. You defy a lot of those stereotypes. We're talking with Catherine Schweit on the Law Enforcement Today show. We're going to talk about mass shootings, her involvement, investigations, what she's learned, in particular the Navy Yard and Holocaust Museum. This is the Law Enforcement Today show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. sure to look for the Law Enforcement Today radio show all over social media. We're on Facebook. Look for Law Enforcement Today radio show. On MeWe.com, look for Law Enforcement Today radio show. On Twitter, follow LET Radio Show PO1. On Instagram, follow LET Radio Show Podcast. And on Gab.com, search for Law Enforcement Today radio show. Again, our website is letradioshow.com. Hope to see you online soon. Check out the Change of Culture podcast, hosted by Autumn Clifford, a female cop. You can also find her on Instagram and TikTok. Look for Officer Autumn. Search for Autumn Clifford on Facebook, and her website is autumnclifford.com. Back to our conversation with Catherine Schweit on the Law Enforcement Today show. She is a retired FBI executive. She's agent. She's a lawyer, Cook County prosecutor. She is a security consultant, also a professor and author of the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. During your career in the FBI, before we went to break, Kathy, you started talking about you became involved in investigating, overseeing, and learning as much as possible about mass shooting situations. And one of the ones that I do recall, and I'd love to say vividly, but I don't recall like I used to, was the Holocaust Museum in D.C., scene of a horrible, horrible event. And you were involved in investigating that one, weren't you?
Yes, I was. I was working in our Washington field office at the time. That shooting, as you recall, was in the summer 2009. So Washington, D.C., hot, steamy summers where, tons and tons of school kids in town and tourists in town. So it was quite an event.
And there's a potential for a tremendous amount of loss of life. I do remember some people did die and some were injured. What was the overall casualty count?
Yeah, let me give you just a background, to refresh yours and the listeners' recollections. We had a incident that occurred right around noontime. It was almost 1 o'clock, but just in that noon lunch hour. We had an 87-year-old man who drove up in his car, parked right in front of the building in the parking lane in a very busy road, got out of his car and walked into the building. And as he walked into the building, he raised a shotgun and killed a security guard. He was a special police officer. So these are law enforcement officers, not security guards. This is actually museum special police officer Stephen Tyrone Johns. The officers was working with two other officers who exchanged fire and shot the subject in the neck. So it was a very quick 2-minute incident, but very dramatic incident that occurred in downtown Washington, one that we haven't seen in a tremendous number of years.
And that's the type of environment where you wouldn't expect this sort of thing to occur.
Exactly. And the building, like as many buildings in Washington after 9/11 and subsequent events, the building had security. The Holocaust Museum building has been opened. I think it was opened maybe 92. So it had been open for a few years, and good security in the front, good security in the back, just like all the other security where people would walk to magnetometers and things like that. And there had never really been anything like that. And I can tell you because I was there, the FBI had no known threats. There were no concerns at the time that were any specific threats. So it literally kind of came out of the blue, which is what happens in these kinds of shootings sometimes.
And it's very unusual, and I'm by no means an expert, but it's very unusual to have a shooter that's elderly in their 80s that does this sort of thing. That's
correct. I've researched a lot of these shootings, as you can imagine, because I authored the FBI's research on active shooters, and we had shooters as young as 12, but this was our oldest shooter in 20 years, and he was 87 at the time, and in fact he was hit in the neck in exchange of gunfire, and he died 6 months later in the hospital. So he had just turned 88 a few weeks after the shooting incident. But he was 87 at the time, which is an important thing to say because 88 means something to white supremacists. And in this case, this was a white supremacist, and we wanted to, and he's neo-Nazi, self-avowed, He'd had a lot of trouble with the law before, and was very intent on doing this. But you are correct. The average age, what we see, is in the 30s. 35 years old, median age 32. Very unusual.
I'm glad you didn't mention his name. I'm a big proponent of not giving these people any publicity whatsoever. You mentioned the white supremacists, and I have to say this. I was working as a sergeant in Northwest District of Baltimore, and it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and we had the NAACP headquarters in our district. And a group of people had gotten a permit to do a protest/parade at the NAACP headquarters. What a lot of people realize back then, it was well off the beaten path, and people couldn't see it. And it was neo-Nazis, neo-Nazi skinheads, and KKK that were doing this. And I was the acting lieutenant in charge. Quiet day. And they wanted to go to a busy intersection to do it, which wasn't for the permit, or the permitted area. But we had to make sure that their right to free speech was protected. However, they knew right off the top of the bat, without a shadow of a doubt, because I had a conversation with the leader, there'd be no problems, there'd be no violence, there'd be none of that stuff, because it would be handled decisively. That's all I can say about this. It's a bad situation for a law enforcement being. You don't want to protect these people's rights, but you've got to.
You're right. I mean, I think that especially, I'm obviously as an FBI agent, the Constitution is sacrosanct. That's what we swear an allegiance to, is the Constitution, and that includes the First Amendment and all the other amendments to the bill in the Bill of Rights. And everybody does have that authority, that right to assemble, to peaceably assemble, to speak what they want of their own free will and say what they want to say, as long as they do it peaceably. But I think your point is what you saw is absolutely well taken about what happens in those instances when they come together for a march, for a protest, and they're all together. I think they stop and think about the fact that we're going to have this little march on the corner of 4th and Main, but if we cause any problems, the police are going to give us, we're going to give police a reason to cause problems. But I think these individual situations where, like this guy who came and pulled up in front of the Holocaust Museum, he's one guy. He's not thinking. He's had trouble before. He was arrested and actually served jail time for trying to take hostages at the Federal Reserve Board. He didn't like their policies. And I think, it's easy to look at somebody like that and say, oh, this person is so down the drain and he's such a mess. But, if you look back in this guy's history, he's a college graduate. He was in the Navy. He commanded a PT boat. He worked as an ad executive. He had his own job in his own life, but then somehow it just started to go downhill, and nobody caught it. And this is what the result was.
And one of the things that people always say in the news, will interview people say, I never saw a sign. He's a quiet guy. He kept to himself, never saw it. We as a society teach our children, be worried about the boogeyman. Be worried about the guy down the street that looks a little creepy, that's got the car, hey kid, let's go help find my puppy. And those are legitimate threats to be concerned about. But the far more dangerous are the man, the woman who looks like everybody else, doesn't attract attention, and all of a sudden, may not be all of a sudden, we hear them committing huge acts of violence. I believe this guy walked up and said something first, didn't he?
Spot on. Actually, he didn't say anything coming to the door. He had etchings on his shotgun. He had a Winchester shotgun with him, a 12 gauge that he used, and he didn't. What happened, and how unfortunate that the special officer Johns was very well loved. He'd been on the scene for 6 years working there, and he was the greeter, kind of. He came to the door, and when he saw this gentleman get out of the car, he actually stepped up to the door and opened the door for him. And in exchange, the man raised a shotgun and killed him.
We're taking a short break. We're talking with Catherine Schweik. Catherine is a former FBI agent executive, a lawyer, Cook County prosecutor. She is a corporate security trainer and author of the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. This is Law Enforcement Today's show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This portion of the Law Enforcement Today radio show is brought to you in part by Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Everyone's welcome at the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page, where you'll find fun, informative, and enjoyable posts daily. Purebred, mixed breeds, rescues, we love them all. Be sure to like the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. During a conversation with Catherine Schweik, Catherine is a retired FBI agent executive. She's also a lawyer, Cook County prosecutor, journalist, corporate security training director, author of the book Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. We're talking about, earlier in your career, we talked about what you did in the FBI. All very much appreciated. I forgot to say thank you for your service, but I do thank you very, very much. One of the difficult things you had to deal with in your career was overseeing, investigating these mass shootings. And another one in the D.C. area that I do remember, again, the details get kind of fuzzy, was the Navy Yard shooting. A lot of people don't realize that aren't in D.C. a lot or live outside the Beltway, that the Navy Yard is a huge area with lots of people. And I believe the vice president's residence is not far from there as well either.
Yeah, everybody who's anybody lives somewhere or walks around or drives by the Navy Yard, and it's very close to the Capitol building, and so it is a very high security area, and it's where NCIS is, and it's the Navy Yard. It's where the Navy is, not for the most part, and so you're right. That was a terrible shooting too. I'd been promoted and moved into FBI headquarters by the time that the Navy Yard shooting occurred, where the Holocaust shooting was in 2009. The Navy Yard shooting was in 2013. But it, too, was a kind of a warm fall day, which I guess is better than responding to something in the snow or the ice and the rain, I say as a northerner. But it was a completely different type of situation than Holocaust, because in Holocaust we had a situation that was quickly over in 2 minutes. In Navy Yard, I was working in our Strategic Operations Command Center, and we were agonizingly listening to radio transmissions and trying to coordinate resources as the shooting went on for more than an hour, which was the longest shooting spree that we've dealt with.
I remember hearing all kinds of reports, and this is one of the reasons why I suspect the police and the federal agents don't want to give out information until they have it nailed down. But they were giving out different reports of how many shooters. Was it one shooter?
You have good memory there, because that's exactly what happened. There was a single shooter, but the reports all day long, law enforcement had heard there might be two, and one of the police departments involved was reporting that there were two. We were reporting that there was one. We were trying not to trump any local reports, because we try to coordinate everything through the National Capital Response Squad, which is a group of all the agencies in Washington, D.C. that respond together. They have common radio channels, which is, as a law enforcement officer, is so important. So we had great response, but that idea of are you looking for one shooter or two dramatically affects the way you go into a scene.
An environment like the Navy Yard, where there's a lot of buildings, a lot of hard surfaces, it's not like a rural area where you have one gunshot. You have one gunshot, you have multiple echoes, and it can easily be confused as being multiple shooters. But there was, if my memory is right, and trust me, Catherine, my ripe old age, as often as not, they were following and had reports of this guy on video at different locations, security video throughout the buildings there.
Well, we did, but I'll tell you, let me tell you some of the good and the bad about this inside baseball. You're right. The building itself, Building 197, is about a 600,000 square foot building. It's an atrium building, so the ricochets and the sounds. This guy also had a 12 gauge shotgun, and so the sounds were just echoing in the building, and so it was very hard to know where he was. In fact, he started on the 4th floor and he went to the 3rd floor, then he came down to the 1st floor, and as that noise is going on. In fact, there are cameras all over the building, but I'll tell you what happened when you talk about protocols and what we learned from an after action. The guy who was responsible for the video cameras, someone pulled the fire alarm when the shooting started, and the guy who was responsible for the video cameras in the building did exactly what his protocol was. He exited the surveillance room, locked the door, and left the building. So the entire time that we were looking for that shooter, we had no knowledge of the cameras and no access to them.
They might as well have not existed at that point.
Exactly. And I think another thing that we, remember there were some shootings at Fort Hood?
Yeah.
And they changed, the military changed protocols and said you must have a 911 operator system so that you can make phone calls in. Well, that kind of backfired at Navy Yard, because everybody who was in the building who was calling their internal 911 those calls went to one location. People who were calling the external 911, those calls went to Metropolitan Police, MPD, so Washington Metropolitan Police Department. So what happened is the police officers were only getting, the police department was only getting a fraction of the material because a lot of the information was going into the Navy Yard 911 system and those people there who were not communicating with the MPD people. So a lot of coordination issues that were just frustrating. And I think, Kathy Lanier, the police chief at the time, who's now with the NFL, she did such a fantastic job of, kind of, I'm going to say owning up, but it wasn't anything she did that was her fault. But, she was straightforward about here's all the things that went wrong and here's the difficulties that we had. She had officers who responded, who actually, I'll tell you, after about 70 minutes, 2 teams of officers managed to come from one end of a corridor and another team from another end of the corridor, and the shooter actually popped up and shot at them, and one of the officers took a bullet in the vest, which was fantastic as opposed to any place else, and they managed to shoot and kill him. But I'll tell you, the 2 responding teams were on different radio channels, so they didn't know each other was coming down the hallways.
We had that problem too. And I know a lot of things changed after 9/11, but I remember policing in Baltimore where cops in the Northwest District couldn't talk to cops in the Northern District. And the other jurisdiction in the county, they couldn't. Now, at least we shared dispatchers, so we could pass information back and forth. But it was very difficult. And then you have 2 teams in a hostage or a barricade or an active shooter situation trying to locate the shooter, and they can't even communicate. That's really tying one hand behind their back.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you one of the most frightening, not surprisingly, I also did I did a cold brief. I did a hot wash with the command leader from the FBI, who I know, and to see, okay, what did I not hear while you were down there? Because he was in operations command, operations on the ground, special ops command, and he said to me, I have never had so many people running at me and running towards a building at once. He said we had 117 law enforcement officers inside the building and could not clear the building until we ordered everybody out of the building. They had officers who were tactical teams from MPD who were trained to active shooter response with 3 people on a team. They had off-duty officers from different agencies who ran inside with their Hawaiian shirts on and shorts and their baseball caps backwards on their heads, but they had a gun on, so they went in. So everybody's well-intentioned, right? But it creates this chaos that could have involved a tremendous amount of blue-on-blue. Thank
goodness that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we I think was probably fortunate is the shooter. He's 34 years old. He had some kind of long-standing mental health issues. They really weren't properly reported, and there was a lot of stuff afterwards about whether or not he should have been allowed in the building that day and things like that, and the troubles that he'd had. But he came with this Remington 870 12 gauge, and I might be wrong about it, but I think that he had 20 rounds in his pocket, and that was it. So, we've had a huge number of shooters that have come in with hundreds of rounds. And I think he had 20 rounds for the shotgun that he'd bought the day before. And that's the reason he went down to the first floor. And I'll tell you the sad part is that he went down to the first floor probably because he ran out of rounds. And when he took the internal stairway, which we saw later on film, he took the internal stairway and went down to the first floor. The security guard who was there, armed, had been told, stay by here, don't let him out of the building. But he had his back to the door where the stairway was.
We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Catherine Schweit. This is the Law Enforcement Today Show. Trust me, you don't want to go anywhere. A lot of great stuff to cover. We'll be right back. One of the most frequent questions we see is, where can I find great podcasts? Do you have any suggestions? Yes, we do. So we decided to start our own podcast network on Law Enforcement Today. That's right. You can find top podcasts about law enforcement on our website and our free app. Go to letradioshow.com, click the Be Heard tab, and there you'll find the LET Podcast Network. We'll be adding more podcasts from first responders and more. Again, to find the Law Enforcement Today Podcast Network, go to letradioshow.com and click on the Be Heard in our menu, or download our free app today at letradioshow.com. Current conversation with Catherine Schweit. She is a retired FBI agent executive, also a lawyer, Cook County prosecutor. She's a professor. She's a journalist. She's authored the book, Stop the Killing, How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. Before we went to break, Catherine, we're talking about the Navy Yard shooting, and I had to cut for a hard break. You're talking about a security guard, a special officer, at the stairwell. The bad guy's coming down the stairs, and the special officer is being instructed not to let him out, correct?
Exactly. The law enforcement, there are a tremendous number of law enforcement going into the building, and the law enforcement outside is trying to begin to coordinate who's going into the building, and they turn to this gentleman and say, if you see him coming down to the lobby, don't let him leave the building. And so he's there in the building, and it's sad to watch, but we obviously had an opportunity to do after action and look at all the videotape and the surveillance cameras, and you see him come down the stairway and down the stairway and down the stairway from third and then fourth, third, second, first. He pops out that door, and he walks up right behind the security officer and kills him. And he takes the security officer's gun and goes back into the stairway. And when he goes back into the stairway, I think he gives a momentary thought to leaving the building. And the stairway has an exterior door also, which we know a lot of people fled from. And because the fire alarms had been pulled in the building, thousands of people had emptied out of the building. And the shooter, the killer, before he goes back upstairs, he opens up the side door, like looking out into the alley, thinking, maybe I'll just step out here, is perhaps what he was thinking. And there are so many people outside. He lifts the security officer's gun, fires one round, and then runs back inside. That one round kills an individual running away and shoots him in the head and runs as he's running away. So now we have a shooter that appears to have occurred shooting outside, making it much more complicated for law enforcement, because now they have a person who's hit in an alley and we don't understand why.
And none of this at the time makes sense. And be honest with you, none of it really makes sense logically afterwards, why people do these things. Mental illness, hate, whatever it might be. My mind doesn't really work that way. I realize law enforcement officers have a job to do, and the first thing is you want to neutralize the threat so that they can't hurt anybody else. One thing before we get further in the conversation, both of these horrible events have in common is they both use 12-gauge shotguns. People would automatically assume we're talking about the heavy military-style weapons. 12-gauge shotgun is no joke, and they can do a lot of damage, as was the case with both of these situations. And they're readily available. They're not hard to get. I remember watching a documentary, I believe it was about World War I, and the 12-gauge pump shotgun was designed for trench warfare. A lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it is it's a simple gun. We think of it as a hunting item, right, or something for target practice, but it leaves a big hole.
Yeah, I've got a 12-gauge shotgun, and I tell people it's probably the best weapon for home defense, as a 12-gauge shotgun. People love to talk about it, and I'm not an expert when it comes to rifles, guns, or anything like that. I never had them, Catherine, until I got into police work. So it was always a tool for the job. It was never a passion of mine. I want to go back to your opinions. Having learned and investigated these things, what's the number one thing that we in society need to do to start preventing some of these things from occurring?
I think the number one thing that we need to do is own it. I think as a civilian, most citizens say the police have to solve this problem. The police, I'll call the police. If it's a big enough problem, then I'll call the police and the police will come. But the police are the very last ones to find out if somebody is a concern. Neighbors, friends, coworkers, pastors, business owners, HR people, the people next door that you see that are suddenly doing something, you have to own it, and you have to call and trust that the professionals like the police and mental health counselors are going to do something about it if they know about it. But they can't do anything about it if they don't know about it.
Right.
And that's where I think our biggest failure is. Citizens don't feel it's their responsibility. And let me add this. Citizens think oftentimes, I don't want to get somebody in trouble. I don't want to get involved. And those two factors keep people from making phone calls. When you and I know, you can call the police, or you can call a pastor, or you can call anybody and say, I don't want to get involved, but let me tell you what I know. And time is of the essence in these situations.
I would much rather people call the police and be wrong than people have to call the funeral director.
Yep, spot on. Amen to that.
And one of the things that I learned in police work, and I know you're going to agree with me on this one, is, and I don't care what people believe. You believe in God, you believe in Mother Nature, whatever it is. If something is making you feel worrisome about somebody, it's making a hair on your neck stand up, your instincts are saying there's something wrong with this person. I'd rather you take action and alert someone. If you're wrong, you can always apologize. If you're not wrong, you can't undo what they did. Correct.
I can't tell you how many times, you know as well as I do, how many times we've seen in a police report a neighbor who's interviewed who says, well, he was doing something, he was acting kind of hinky. A teacher who says, the teacher who, the shooter at Virginia Tech University lived not just a couple blocks from me and went to school with my kids, and the same school as my kids. And one of his teachers was approached after the shooting, and she said, you don't even have to tell me who it was. I know who it was. People know. Yeah. People know.
God, Mother Nature, whatever, gave you these instincts to survive. And they gave you those instincts for a reason. So always trust your gut. And you made a great comment, Catherine. Hinky. You know how many cases I've solved because someone was hinky, just didn't act right.
We know it. We all have that feeling. We all know, and we get that feeling, and we just shouldn't ignore it. And another problem that happens is even when somebody thinks about it, they talk to the wrong person about it. They'll call their neighbor, they'll call their friend or their sister, or they'll tell their husband, it just seems kind of hinky. This is things, but they don't call the right people who can act.
Yeah, calling Joe the plumber down the street's not going to help.
Right. Call somebody who can act to check up on it. Doesn't mean you're getting anybody in trouble.
And a question, I hate to throw questions at you. One of my pet peeves is that when someone commits a mass shooting, everybody knows their name. The news media puts out their manifestos, the reason why they did it, whatever their twisted thinking was, and they become infamous. Meanwhile, someone who feeds thousands of people a day who are homeless, no one knows their name.
Yep. I will tell you, just to give you a little positive thought about that, the media is keenly aware that they have been complicit in this, and there have been there's been some research that I can refer you to that shows that this contagion factor applies, that naming people turns them into martyrs. We've seen that particularly with the shooters from the high school out in Colorado, and when that occurs and people begin to idolize them, then it's not about the survivors and it's not about the victims. And I think the reason that happens is because we are so, as a society, we're so hungry for news. And the news story, the narrative for the news story on the day of the shooting, the only narrative that the media can grasp is the known quantity, the shooter.
Let's talk about your book. Stop the Killing, How to End the Shooting Crisis. Where do people get it? Where can they buy it? Where can they get more information?
Oh, I appreciate you mentioning that. You can go to my website. It has all the places listed. Catherine Schweit, KatherineSchweit.com, KatherineSchweit.com. If you go there and you look at the buy the book link, you can, the cheapest, best way to do it is sign up for my newsletter. There's a discount code on there. You can get I think it's a 30% discount. And so you can get it for basically what I can get it for. But that would be and there's also more resources on that site. We try to share, I'm trying to share with the regular newsletter and through blog entries, information. People need to just learn kind of what's going on and be engaged and be involved. And then they won't be so afraid, because they'll exchange some facts for some fear. Knowledge is power, without a doubt. Your website address one more time. KatherineSchweit.com.
Catherine, thanks so much for all you've done. Thanks for your service, and I really appreciate you being a guest on the Law Enforcement Today show. All of it is very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I'd like to thank our guests so much for coming on the Law Enforcement Today radio show. The Law Enforcement Today radio show is a nationally syndicated radio show broadcast on numerous stations once a week and growing. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, please do me a big favor. Tell a friend. I'll be back in just a couple days with a brand new episode of the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.